So I sculpted some fruit with flat plain sides because painting these is one of my favorite exercises. And what you can learn from painting fruit with flat sides like this will help you paint any subject. So I'm gonna put this photo up here for you to take a screenshot of. When you're done watching this video, try and paint this. I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's a great exercise. And when you complete your painting, if you would like to share it with me, tag me on Instagram at Forza43 or use the hashtag paintcoach. I'd love to see your paintings of this fruit. Now, if you'd like some more guidance and you'd like to paint this along with me, the full version of this tutorial is on my Patreon page, which a link to that is in the description below. Now, I didn't come up with this concept of making flat fruit like this. I've seen many other painters do it, but the first time I ever saw it was actually in Kevin McPherson's book. Kevin McPherson's book. There we go. Fill your oil paintings with light and color. Now, if you've seen any of my videos, you know I talk about his books a lot. They are great. They're one of the first painting books I ever got. I learned a lot from them. And if you'd like to get this or his other book, I have links in the description to where you can get those. I've also touched on this concept in my Foundations of Oil Painting course. When I built the course, I didn't know how these were made. I thought they were wood, like I didn't know how to do it. So I actually used a digital version. I just made a limit in Photoshop with flat plain sides. Now that I have the real things, I am so happy. So let's jump into why exactly painting these is such a good exercise. First off, it makes seeing changes in value a lot easier because every time there's a plane change, there's a value change. And since the planes are clearly defined and flat, it's very obvious when the value is changing. When things are perfectly smooth and the values are all blended together, it makes it difficult to identify where exactly value changes are happening. Now remember, value is how light or dark a color is, and value is how we are going to create form with our paintings. You know, painting is two-dimensional. We're not using a three-dimensional form like clay and sculpting like sculptors. We have to use something else, and that is value. Now, something very interesting that I read in Andrew Loomis's book about planes is that when the head is painted too smooth and too round, it lacks structure. But if a head is painted too blocky and the planes are too defined, it can look like it was carved out of wood or clay. And he said that the kind of the best is the happy medium in between both. And the fact that a painting can incorporate both the blockiness and the smoothness makes it much superior to a photograph of a portrait, which is all smooth and round. To be able to stress the planes a little bit more is going to give the portrait more structure. When things are too smooth, it just doesn't seem like there's much of a structure underneath all that smoothness. And so the same thing applies here. And yes, this is an exaggeration. This fruit is very blocky and very rigid and structured. But from my experience, I see students could utilize pushing a little more blockiness into their paintings. I just felt that was such a good way of explaining the importance of incorporating planes, is that they're going to give whatever it is that you're painting just more structure and just feel more solid. All right, the other thing that this is going to help you out with is color. More importantly, shifts in color. Again, with a regular piece of fruit that's round and smooth, the color changes are going to be subtle because everything's kind of blending together. With these crisp planes, it's very clear when there's a color shift because there's going to be a color shift when there is a plane shift. And since they're not blended together, they're side by side and you can easily see the difference in what's happening to the color from plane to plane. For example, with this pear, this top part of the pear is a flat plane that is facing upward, just like the ground. You know, it's facing upward, so it's catching the light that is coming down more. When the plane changes and drops and becomes flat here, it's not getting the direct light that the top plane is. So this plane is going to be darker. And just how this plane right here is turning more away from the light, it's going to get darker. And the opposite with this plane is turning more towards the light, it's going to get lighter. These planes are also going to help you see and understand reflected light more. Again, with this pear, you see this plane down here and how it is obviously catching this turquoise, blue, aqua teal, whatever light of the ground that is reflected up on it. So when it comes time to paint this area and you have the color of your pear on your palette, mixing in some of the ground color into it is gonna help you get this color. Exact same thing is happening right here on this apple. You see a lot of that bluish light coming up right there. And again, since these planes are clearly defined and obvious, it's going to make these colors defined and obvious, and they're going to be easier to compare. And when you can compare them easily, you can figure out what you need to add to your color to get to a different color. Now, if you do struggle with color mixing, I'm not going to get into it in this video because I offer the color mixing video from my Foundations of Oil Painting course for free. If you want to check it out, a link to get that is in the description of this video. Now, another thing that this exercise is going to help you with is brushwork. I get a lot of people asking me like, how do I get better brushwork? How do I have more expressive brushwork? Or how do I paint looser? And I always say with brushwork, the best way to think about it is, what is your intent behind your brushwork? It's not necessarily being conscious of your brushwork as much as how you're thinking about the object and how you're thinking about the painting is going to influence how you move the brush. I always like to say, think about it as if you are wrapping the paint around the subject, like it's paper mache. And since the planes of this fruit are very clear and obvious, it should be easier to think about as if you are running your brush along these planes in real three-dimensional space. Also, as I'm painting, I'm trying to see how long I can keep my brush on the canvas with each stroke. I feel like this helps make your brushwork bolder and more confident, opposed to a bunch of tiny little strokes. All right, now let's talk about my process for actually painting these. Now, the first thing that I do is I draw out the fruit, but I do that using straight lines. And I try and do this even when I'm painting normal fruit, but since this fruit is planed, they are comprised of straight lines. It's just that straight lines are easier to get right than curved lines. It's also gonna help you see the proper angles and again, just give more structure to what you are drawing. Next, I use a wash to just block out the light and shadow shapes. It's very important to simplify your subject into light and shadow at the beginning. And the plain fruit is gonna make that even easier. It's gonna be very clear which part is in shadow and which part is in light. And just taking that small step of identifying light and shadow in your subject is gonna make the rest of your painting process a lot easier. A lot of times people just wanna jump into details and just jump right into painting one little area to completion when there are certain things that you can do to make the process easier. For example, the next thing that I do is the same thing, but with color. I find an average color of the shadow and an average color of the light side, and I block it in just with flat color. And now with the light side, I kind of go for the darkest light value that I can because I like to work dark to light and I want to be able to build lighter values on top of that. So I do like working dark to light, so I like to start in the shadows and actually get the cast shadow on the ground, and then I find the few darkest values in the shadows. But it's also very important to get the surrounding colors of the object and actually get the ground color here because I know that's going to be reflected into the shadows. And if I get the ground color first, it's just gonna help me figure out that reflected light and actually use some of that ground color and brush it into the wet paint in the shadows. And I'm being very conscious of the pressure I'm putting on the brush. I want that paint to mix in to that wet paint. You know, I might have to adjust the color a little bit. I may not be able to use the exact color from the ground. You might have to adjust it a bit, but I know working that into that wet paint is going to give me the right color and value for that reflected light. But don't make this too bright. That's the most common mistake with reflected light. It's very easy if you put too much pressure and you put too much of that light in there, it's gonna push that section of the fruit out of the shadows and it's just not gonna look right. And you can see how much form is already being portrayed with the apple. You know, I could put the bright highlight in here and it still look pretty good. But let's push it a little further and find some more planes. I actually noticed this cool little plane here on the top of the apple that seemed a little more yellow because I think it was actually catching some reflected light from that lemon. So I get that in, then I move around to identify other planes with shifts in color or value. And bada boom, you got an apple. I just followed the same process for the other two pieces of fruit. I blocked out the light and shadow first with flat color. Then I worked in some reflected light into the shadows and then moved around finding subtle color shifts to identify the different planes. And then by the end, you know, finding the lightest color and values. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Again, if you paint this still life, please tag me on Instagram at Forza43. Use the hashtag PaintCoach. I'd love to see it. All right, I'm Chris Fornatero here telling you to go get painting.